I want to start here, though. If you were with us last night, your head might still be spinning from all the new and stunning details that came out late in the day in the Idaho student murders. And I know I'm right there with you. It's just kind of mind-blowing what we're learning, because there's been a gag order for 2.5 years. So we rushed that breaking news on the air last night, and we picked it apart in real time. And then when we went off the air, we kept reading through the hundreds of pages, and we found even more. Some of it comes close to smoking gun territory, where Bryan Kohberger is concerned, but even now, the defense has an answer for almost everything. And I stress the word almost. We now know a lot about Kohberger's so-called click history at Amazon. Yesterday, I told you that he bought a K-bar knife, identical to the murder weapon, 8 months before the university students were murdered. He also bought a K-bar knife sheath, identical to the one that was left behind at the crime scene. And for good measure, he bought a knife sharpener, according to the prosecutor's list of Amazon purchases. But now we know he was looking to buy something else, a so-called replacement K-bar knife and sheath. And this was after the murders happened. Remember, the killer made that critical mistake and left the knife sheath next to the bodies of Kaylee Gonzalez and Maddie Mogan. The murder weapon has never been found, so it stands to reason that the killer might need a replacement for both the knife and the sheath, if anyone ever came around asking. And of course, someone came around asking Bryan Kohberger. By the way, we also got to see the selfie that Bryan Kohberger himself snapped in what appears to be his bathroom, a bathroom. But we know this, that picture with the shower behind him was taken just 6 hours after the murders, and an hour and a half before 911 was even called. He is smiling. He's giving a thumbs up about something, seemingly does not have a care in the world, and looks pretty proud of, again, something. This was taken after tracking shows that Kohberger's cell phone visited the King Road area twice just that morning, traveling from his student apartment across the state line in Washington. And with all of this new information, we have a new theory about why he might have felt compelled to go back to the murder scene in the morning, if indeed he's the murderer. I'm joined again by NewsNation's senior national correspondent, Brian Entin, who's been going through these documents. Boy, we didn't sleep much last night going through these documents. No. We're on FaceTime, just finding one thing after another. So let's talk about first this replacement knife and sheath. That I actually missed the first time around. When I saw that he bought the knife and the sheath and the sharpener 8 months before the murders, it was a eureka moment. But then came in the footnotes this replacement knife and sheath. So walk me through your thoughts about that.
Yeah, I mean, this was kind of buried. It was like hundreds of pages of documents, and you mentioned that we were going through them till like 1 a.m. together. And I was also so struck by the fact that he bought the knife and the sheath, according to prosecutors, that I missed this one little teeny line in one of the state documents until I found it in the middle of the night, which is really, really interesting. They say that after the murders, so he bought the knife and the sheath before the murders, they say, but after the murders, they went through his click history on his Amazon account and that he was searching for a knife and sheath, which is very, very interesting when you think about why, perhaps. Did he suddenly realize that, he realized that he left the knife at the scene and wanted to have a knife in case police came knocking on the door and said, "Where's the knife?" So that's one possible reason, but
left the sheath
really an interesting piece of information.
Scene, right? Like left the sheath at the scene and then disposed of the murder weapon somewhere. It's never been found. We presume that if he's the killer, he took an hour to get back home, what would have been a 10-minute drive. So maybe circled somewhere far and wide and disposed of that knife. And then here's the other thing. Don't know when or if he knew, oh, dear God, I don't have the sheath. So let's talk about that next morning, because at like 9 in the morning, the cops don't know yet. The roommates don't know yet. 911 hasn't been called yet for hours. His Elantra is driving by the house again.
Yeah, they've got the surveillance video that shows him back near the house near 9:32 a.m., which makes you wonder what was going on there. Did he realize at that point that he had left the sheath behind and was perhaps going back and considering trying to get it again? Was he just going back to gawk and sort of, you know, you hear about when people set a fire, an arsonist, and they want to go like kind of see the place burn. We don't know why he went back, but the selfie that you showed again in the intro, which is like so creepy to look at with the thumbs up and the shower in the background and like the kind of smirk, there it is. The selfie was taken at 10:31 a.m. So it's all very close together. He went back to the apartment or to the house, according to prosecutors, around 9:32, and then took the selfie an hour later at 10:31.
Which, again, if he's the killer and the killings happened between 4 and 4:30 and he didn't get home till 5:30, you think that would be the first shower, right, if you're covered in that evidence. And so this looks like a fresh shower. And again, this is at 10:30. So this is, you know, 5 hours after he would have returned home from the murders, again, if he's the killer. So now I want to bring in another piece that is tied to all of this, because as we're trying to figure out, if he's the killer, was he going back to the house in the morning gawking and looking for action, or was he going back to find the knife sheath that perhaps he realized, dear God, I've dropped a critical piece of evidence? And that's now where I'm sticking, because there's some more evidence that came out in these documents that will take you there, and I'll explain it. So the state apparently did test runs through this house, parking a car, walking from where the killer's car would have been to the door, entering the house, going up the stairs, pretending, you know, to have killed 2 people, coming down the stairs, down the hall, killing 2 other people, and then making your way out of the house and back to the vehicle. And the key words that are used in the test run is taking off the bloody clothes and then driving away. First of all, I can't believe they did these tests, and they determined it is possible. It is possible to do all that in a very short amount of time. But taking those bloody clothes off, it made me wonder, if Kohberger's the killer and he was taking off those bloody clothes and didn't see in the darkness that the knife sheath, you know, might have gone off with the clothing, perhaps that's why he came back and spent 9 minutes at that house looking at the place where perhaps he had taken those clothes off the night before.
It's possible, or maybe he left some of the bloody clothes out, or he was worried that he left something behind, if they think that maybe he was trying to change right out there outside the house next to the car or on the side of the house. Maybe he was looking for something outside the house. Maybe he was considering going back in to look for the sheath. But it's so interesting, because when I was outside the house for all that time after the murders, you know, there were weird things happening with the prosecutors and the police and the investigators and all the testing that they were doing. And there were just weird movements that they would do, walking to the door, going to the road. And I remember wondering what they were doing. And now that all these documents are coming out, it really sort of explains some of it. And I think some of what we saw were the test runs. They were trying to time it out and figure out how long it could have taken him. Because that's been one of the big perplexing things about the case, is like, how did you go to bedroom, stab all of those young kids, and manage to get away and no one see a thing?
Right, and of course the reason we ask that is because they say there's no blood in the car, so how would that terrible bloody scene have not transferred into the car? Did he take off, he, meaning the killer, take off all the bloody clothes before getting in that vehicle in the darkness right there beside the house? So it's fascinating, because we couldn't see inside the house. They pulled all the blinds. But when they came in and out of the house, we didn't know what they were doing when they were inside. And now, of course, we can't know, because they tore the house down. So another massive detail, I think, to drop last night. I'd never seen this anywhere, and it was one mention. It didn't repeat itself anywhere in the other documents I saw, and that is that Dylan said she was 3 feet away from the killer. And I just stretched my arm out, because I still cannot believe that this is how far roughly 3 feet is. And not only that, she saw him holding something.
Yeah, there were some interesting new nuggets involving Dylan because they actually included the verbatim statements that she made to police officers when she was talking to them about what she saw. And she said that she saw the person in the house holding something. She did not give more specifics than that, but she said holding something. And something else that struck me, Ashleigh, I don't know if you noticed this, she talked about how she had seen the picture of Bryan Kohberger. She had seen him in the vest, and I'm assuming she's talking about the moment where he was in that bulletproof vest when we were out there and they pulled him off the plane when they brought him back to Pennsylvania. She must have been watching the news, and they asked her during this interview, well, does that look like the person that you saw? And she said, I have no clue. So she wasn't able to make that connection, but she did go back several times to the bushy eyebrows, which again, I think is why that selfie, that creepy selfie picture is so important. That's why the prosecution is keying in on that. They want to show that picture to the jury and say, you know, do you think these are bushy eyebrows? This is the last photo of him taken after the murders.
And just, you know, 5-6 hours after the murders, you can't have changed the eyebrows much in that short period of time. This is what the man looked like if this is him. I did find it very interesting in these documents to see that Dylan Mortensen interviewed 5 times with police and once in front of the grand jury. And never did she waver from, I saw bushy eyebrows, maybe one eyebrow, but bushy eyebrows is everything I remember. Can't tell you about the eyes, can't tell you about much else. Yes, I was drunk. Yes, it was scary, but 5 different times from the moment they were in the parking lot out front of the house that morning all the way through to the grand jury, her story never changed. 5 times with cops, once with the grand jury. I think that's super, super powerful. Then Ann Taylor, the defense attorney, comes along and drops a massive document. I've got it here, actually. I've got the bushy eyebrows here, and then I've got the other one that's the neuropsychological and psychiatric evidence motion. And I read through that as well. And she brings up 3 neuropsychological conditions of Bryan Kohberger. She says he's got developmental coordination disorder, DCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD, and then autism spectrum disorder, which is ASD. The significance of all of these are huge. She's explaining away a lot of the bad facts. So walk me through those.
Yeah, this was so fascinating to me because I wondered why she was suddenly having him tested and talking about him being on the autism spectrum and what that was going to have to do with anything, why this was becoming such a big component of things. And this explains it. She is trying to explain away some of the evidence connecting his disorders to why he may have done what he did, like developmental coordination disorder, impacts fine motor dexterity and visual motor function, couldn't have possibly killed 4 people and escaped that quickly because of the DCD, the developmental coordination disorder. The obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD, remember all the talk about him wearing gloves that night and he was trying to cover, you know, fingerprints and evidence. She's saying, no, he was just wearing the gloves because he doesn't like germs, that he was double bagging because of the OCD, the garbage bags. Remember the shower curtain missing from the bathroom, that he doesn't like shower curtains because of contaminants, fear of things getting in his eyes, that he has sleep issues. That's why he goes up in the middle of the night driving around. And then the autism spectrum disorder, that's why she says he doesn't show emotion on his face, has a piercing stare, does not show expected reactions, stiff body posture, little to no eye contact. So now we know why she wants to bring all of these disorders in. She's trying to tell the jury, she's going to try to tell the jury, hey, ignore all of this evidence because this can be explained away by these medical conditions.
Well, the one that stuck out the most to me there was his obsessive-compulsive disorder means he has sleep issues and drives around in the middle of the night. So if stargazing wasn't good enough, they've now come up with a different reason for why he'd be out on a very cloudy night. I checked the weather. Completely overcast night, stargazing. Now it's going to be, I have OCD, so I drive around at night. I'll be interested to see if his cell data shows that he drives around at night with his phone off any other night than the murder night. So great job. You got to get some sleep. That was a long, long night and really good work. So thank you, Brian. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Ash.
Okay, I want to bring in my friend Mark Geragos now. He's a criminal defense attorney, and now he's the co-host of count them, two very popular podcasts, Reasonable Doubt and Two Angry Men. Mark Geragos, since you are the biggest expert I know in famous trials, I wanted to call you about all of these new details that have come out in these court documents after a desert, for 2.5 years, a gag order that's kept us all in the dark. I look at this as the layman and say he's finished. He's absolutely finished. He bought a K-bar knife, a sheath, and a sharpener 8 months before the murder, and then he bought a replacement K-bar knife, or was looking for a replacement K-bar knife and sheath right after the murders, and then you just add all this other stuff on. But what do you think about this massive document dump?
If I'm not mistaken, you and I talked about a while ago, as you said, it's been quite a time period of wandering around in the wilderness. But I think we talked about the fact that if they had a receipt for this knife or this sheath, obviously they didn't find the knife, sometime prior, that would be, as you call it, a bad fact. The one after, the searching after, the way it was phrased and the way it was buried leads me to believe it's not as significant as the purchase before. And why do I say that? I've had cases where prosecutors will argue that somebody went looking for a particular item on the internet, and then when you drill down into it, it turns out that it was just one in a stream of thousands of things that the browser does. So the one after doesn't really do much. If they can tie the sheath or the same kind prior to this, that's definitely going to be front and center of their opening statement and the trial. For the prosecution and the defense is going to have some explanation.
Right. I would also say I did not see a K-bar knife or a knife sheath or a knife sharpener on the manifest when they pulled everything out of his apartment a couple months later. So that's a bad fact, too. Where is that knife and sheath that's identical to the murder weapon and the murder sheath if it's not in your apartment and you just bought it, less than a year ago? So, okay, the other thing I wanted to ask you about is these conditions, these developmental conditions, developmental coordination disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, and autism. These are the things she's saying make it impossible for him to have been able to run through that house as fast as he would have needed to commit all of those murders, and that this is the one I can't believe. The OCD made him drive around at night, wear gloves. When they arrested him, he was wearing gloves and sorting his trash into little plastic baggies, and change out his shower curtain all the time due to mold. And then the other one was was autism, to say he has a piercing stare and he's strange. So don't judge a book by the cover. It just sounds to me like it's a desperate attempt to find something, anything, to chip away at the bad facts, but it doesn't look like much of a chipper.
Look, there's each one of those taken separately, I think could give you a plausible, it's a circumstantial evidence case. The law on circumstantial evidence in most jurisdictions is if there are two reasonable interpretations, they don't have to be equally reasonable, but two reasonable explanations. One points towards guilt, one towards innocence. You must adopt the one that points towards innocence. The problem is, you've outlined it, if in fact they're going to make those arguments, and I don't know that they necessarily are for each one of those facts. For instance, I'll take one of them out of your litany. The one about gloves and the trash later on, I'm not so sure that that's admissible as a probative fact, and it may be more prejudicial than probative. Why do I say that? That was a long period of time afterwards. If there was nothing in that trash that they found that was incriminating, why would you bring that in other than to just unfairly malign? So I don't know that would necessarily be. The one, I'll give you the prosecution argument is going to be, of course, he's going to try and use that for the shower curtain because he was trying to dispose of the shower curtain because the shower curtain was consistent with somebody who wanted to wash off any kind of the remnants of transferred DNA. So that's a tough fact, ultimately, that they're going to have to deal with. But I'll go back to the sheet. There still is, Ashleigh, there have been internet sleuths who have talked repeatedly about whether or not somebody took that sheath from him, and that's the reason you had the fingerprint. So if that does not undercut the theory if they're going to say, yeah, it was mine, but somebody took it and here's who that person is.
Then where's the knife that was bought with the sheath? Like, that's great if you still have the knife, but my sheath was taken and planted with my DNA on that snap. It's just a little far-fetched to say, and I just lost that knife, coincidentally,
No, I think if the defense is going to be that somebody took the knife and sheath, and that is, yes, it's got his DNA, but the reason it's got his DNA because it was his, somebody else took it. We don't know what happened with the knife because they took it. Yes, it was his, but he was not the person who was there. I believe that's got to be, if they've linked this up, assuming everything, that has to be the defense.
Crazy, because the handle of the knife would definitely have more of his DNA on it if someone wanted to plant his evidence at the scene, and the sheath had almost nothing on it. But okay, one last quick question, and I have to make it quick. The defense doesn't want the words psychopath or sociopath used at trial. Okay, state says they weren't planning to. And then the defense wants no inflammatory evidence, like graphic autopsy photos. Well, Mark Geragos, since when does a defendant get to say you're not allowed to show the autopsy photos of a quadruple stabbing? Like, I just can't even imagine you'd ask that question.
Well, let me play devil's advocate here. A lot of times, the victim's family does not want those photos entered into evidence or does not want them displayed in court, or will make the motion or join in the defense motion to just enter into evidence a small number of them for obvious reasons. Nobody wants to be sitting in a courtroom and watch their loved ones' remains be projected and then captured on the internet or paraded around in publications. So I understand that. And by the way, that once again goes to that analysis. Is it more prejudicial than probative?
Well, I think the jury needs to see the horror that this was in order to land upon something like a death penalty. I think they need to know exactly what happened to those 4 kids. That's me. Hey, Mark Geragos, great to have you. Thank you for doing this. I really appreciate it.
You got it, Ashleigh. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Go to joinnn.com to find NewsNation on your screen. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.